My mother would always say stuff to me like, she'd say, you know, Dave, God has a plan for you. Something would happen, good or bad, she'd say, it's all part of God's plan. I could never help thinking, you know, if God makes plans for everybody, once in a while he must get a little behind in the plan. Maybe some of those days when I can't get out of bed. Maybe I'm not being lazy at all. It could just be that nothing was scheduled. What's the story there, Fitzgerald? How come you're still in bed? Actually, I'm ready to go. I'm just laying here waiting for God to catch up. Wouldn't that be a great way to call in work in the morning? Imagine if you could do this. You call up work in the morning. I'm not coming in today. Yeah, why is that? That's not part of God's plan. Hi, my name is Dave Fitzgerald, and I'm a professional comedian. I've always had a good sense of humor. I can remember back in high school when they used to give out those awards. There was a kid across town won the science award. I remember one of the kids right down the street from me won the math award. And of course, I always came home with that coveted class clown award. My parents were so proud. I can remember my father saying to me, gee, Dave, where are we going to hang that plaque? Well, I've always been able to find the humor in things, and I'm not about to stop doing that now, even though I've been diagnosed with cancer.
Hi, my name is Darren LaCroix. I had a phone conversation with my longtime friend Dave Fitzgerald while he was still in the hospital recovering. His only complaint was that there was nothing funny to watch, nothing to boost his spirits. I remember he said to me in his gravelly voice, "Laughter's the best medicine. There should be something funny to watch." And then we both paused. And at the same time we said, guess whose job that is? Talk about God's plan. Let's listen to Dave's story. Dave, when did you first come to the realization that your sense of humor would be helpful to other people with cancer?
One of the resources I found was a wonderful place called the Wellness Community. And what they do is they help cancer patients to become active in fighting for their own recovery. And I went over there and they had an orientation meeting where you go and they just teach you about the different types of meetings they have, the different types of facilities, different types of things that they do. And everything is free there. It's a fabulous place. So I went to the orientation meeting and we were all sitting around this living room atmosphere, nice soft couches and so forth. And what they did was they had us go around the room and everybody got 2, 3, 4 minutes to tell a little bit about their story and what their diagnosis was and what they had done. So everyone had 2 or 3 minutes. I think, and I probably took about 8 minutes, but I can remember after the meeting, I was approached by this couple, and really the man's wife. The guy's name was Bill Connell, and his wife approached me, and she said, "I just want to thank you." She said, "Bill has been depressed about this diagnosis ever since he heard about it. And the way you talked about it and the way you cracked a couple of jokes and you were laughing and you made fun of it," she said, "that's the first time I've seen him smile in months." She said, "I'm telling you, right, you changed the way he's thinking about this already. His attitude is different than it was 20 minutes ago." And I can remember thinking to myself, wow, the power of humor. I've always known that it has the power, but I never got to see it in this situation. And that's when I said to myself, I said, I'm going to do whatever I can as a comedian, as a funny person. I'm going to try to bring some of what I have to the world of cancer.
And when it comes to patients and their families and dealing with cancer, what part can humor play there?
Well, it's a very touchy thing. It's sometimes easier for the patient to joke around than it is the family. The family is very worried, very concerned what's going to happen to this person. They're very sensitive to the issue about the patient. And yet the patient sometimes wants very much to be able to joke around. I know for myself, I had to be able to have some humor in this or I could not have talked about it at all. It's just too serious. It's too grave. If I couldn't crack a joke about it, I wouldn't be able to even discuss it. And in my comedy routine, I have a couple of segments that I do on. I talk about my surgery. I talk about having cancer on stage. They cut out a piece of my intestine, They made a bladder out of that, hooked it right back up to me again, and I'm working out of the same unit. Now, I was tickled by this. I thought it was great. Very happy. I must tell you, though, that my intestine was kind of upset. Well, look at this from the intestine's point of view. The intestine is thinking, you know, this is not a promotion. Last week I was in food service. Now I'm in waste management. I have had times when, after my show, I've had people approach me that have started to tell me about this situation. I've had 2 women tell me that they had breast cancer after the show, and they haven't even told their family yet they told me.
Now, if I remember right, the day that you were diagnosed was the same day that we started the Humor Institute. We had our promo photos taken. It was a beautiful morning, great day, until you were diagnosed. Cancer. How did that feel?
I will never forget. It was May 14th, 1996. I had my best suit on. We had some pictures taken. It was just a fabulous day, beautiful, sunny day. And I had a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock. I went over to see Dr. Carpenito. I remember it as clear as day. I went in, and I cracked a couple of jokes, and he didn't laugh at all. Now, you know, doctors don't usually laugh anyway. But this guy used to at least smile. He didn't even crack a smile. So I knew something was up. And I went in and I started talking to him, and he started talking about things like lamina propria, invasive tissue, in situ, all these terms. He didn't say the word cancer. And finally I said to him, I said, Doc, do I have cancer? And to his credit, his lips were quivering. You could see he was just about crying. And finally he said yes. And then he started to tell me what the situation was going to be. He said, we're going to have to take out your bladder. You have bladder cancer. And then he said, well, the first decision you have to make is you got to let us know what kind of bladder you want. Right away, I'm thinking, bigger. I'd like to be able to sit through the entire Godfather trilogy. He started describing the different kinds of bladders I could have. I was amazed at this because I had never been shopping for a bladder before. I'm wondering, are there coupons involved?
Okay, you've been diagnosed with cancer. That's a pretty heavy burden. How did you handle that?
Unlike most things I've had to handle in my life, I'm one of these guys that always like to think I could take everything on myself. I can handle everything. Very independent. I don't need any help. This was too big for me. I knew as soon as I was diagnosed, the first thought I had was, my life is never going to be the same again. The second thought I had was, I'm going to have to ask people to help me. I cannot handle this on my own.
How was that for you, asking other people to help you?
Funny thing about that, I'm not someone that asks for help a lot in my life, but I did discover that once I asked somebody to help me, and I saw that they were, not only were they willing to help me, they were absolutely thrilled to be able to help me. That's when I realized that it got easier. I saw the response. I asked somebody to help me. They couldn't wait to help me. So it got easier as time went on, and I got to let more people help me. It did get easier. So I think the key is asking those first couple of people. It can be quite difficult.
So it's a matter of getting started. So who did you turn to first?
I can remember right after I was diagnosed, there was a couple of things I thought about. One was that my life would never be the same again. The second was that I was going to need help. I knew right away that I had my wife, Masha, who was a given, and I knew that she would be on my side no matter what was happening. That's the kind of person she is. If she's on your team, she's on your team. And I knew I had that in my back pocket, so that was wonderful. I felt the need to tell someone. I can remember I left the hospital. I was literally walking across the street and had my cell phone, and I called up my friend Mark. I wanted to tell him, and he wasn't home, and I left a really grave message on his machine, but I didn't say the word cancer. But I left a really grave message. It was probably just as bad. But the thing I remember about that was I got some relief just from having said something somewhere. Even though I left it on a machine, it felt good that I had left that message, that I had told somebody about the gravity of my situation. And then I remember having to ask, I called up my sister, and I asked my sister to come to the family meeting with me on Thursday morning. And that was the first time that I really broke down crying. When I actually had to say the words to her, I need you to help me. That was tough for me. I've always been very independent. I don't like to ask anybody to help me. But I learned a big lesson that day.
So what did you ask people to do for you?
If you give people something very specific to do for you, it makes it easier for them. People want to help you. This is what I've discovered more and more since I got the diagnosis. People want to help you desperately. And they're always saying, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? Well, I started to think of things that needed to be done. And I started to actually write down, I need this done. I'll ask so-and-so. I need this done. I'll ask someone else. And it was a great discovery. It was fabulous for me, and it was fabulous for the people that wanted to help me. They had concrete things they could do for me. I called up my sister in California, my youngest sister, Jill, who is wonderful in many areas, but she's always been very good at making musical tapes. And I asked her, I said, Jill, would you make me some cassettes of music that could be related to getting some kind of sickness or having some kind of adversity or having some kind of troubles, maybe some spirituality involved. Could you make me some musical tapes that would be fitting for this situation? Because I knew I was going to be spending some time alone. I was going to be meditating. I was going to be sitting listening to nice music. And she did. She was thrilled to be able to do that for me.
Speaking of your family, what was the family meeting you told me about?
The family meeting was an interesting thing. The first thing that happened out of that, as soon as I found out there was going to be a family meeting, I realized that I was going to have to educate myself. I didn't even know what questions to ask. I was diagnosed on a Tuesday with bladder cancer, and I had a family meeting scheduled for Thursday morning. And I immediately started to think, well, I need questions. What do I even ask? I had no clue. So I can remember on that Wednesday, I went to the bookstore, and I called up the bookstore, and I said, I had a couple of titles. My sister had given me some titles to look for on cancer. And I called up the bookstore, and I said, do you have these titles on cancer? And they said, well, not only do we have those titles, but we have an entire section on cancer. It turns out I went to the bookstore, and there was a section there, probably 50, maybe 60 books on cancer. I was amazed at that. Of course, I never needed to know that before, so why would I know? So anyway, I got some books on cancer. I found one that had a section specifically dealing with bladder cancer, and I began to educate myself.
So you wrote the questions down. Why?
Someone gave me this as a tip, and I found it to be invaluable. As a patient, or even as a family member, there's so much emotion involved in this whole atmosphere. I mean, you're talking about cancer. It brings up to mind so many things that to try to ask questions without getting emotionally involved is almost impossible. The other thing that for most people that happens is you can easily ask these questions, and you want to ask all these questions, and you're very aggressive when you're home. And you're very aggressive when you're with your family members and people that love you. But something happens when you're in a hospital, you're in the doctor's office, it's that doctor-hospital atmosphere, and suddenly you don't feel as though you're in charge as much. And I wanted to have the questions in front of me, and I made a commitment to myself that I'm going to ask these no matter what. And no matter how stupid they may seem, I'm going to ask the doctor these questions. And so no matter how the doctor is, when you're sitting there with these questions in front of you on a piece of paper, you commit to the questions, you force yourself to ask the questions, and having them on paper right in front of you, you can just read them. And it allows you to be less emotional, I think. And it also, I had intended for my family members to ask the questions for me, because I thought I would be too emotional. But once the day came and once we were there and I had the questions in front of me, because they were there in front of me on paper, I was able to do it myself.
You were scheduled to do a USO tour to Japan shortly after you were diagnosed. Once you were diagnosed, why did you decide to go ahead with the tour?
I can remember this was we spent probably 50% of the time at the family meeting discussing this tour I wanted to go on. I had found out on May 14th that I had bladder cancer. I was scheduled to go on a tour May 19th. I was going to Japan, Okinawa, and Guam. My family, naturally, particularly my mother, wanted me to just, say the hell with the tour. She didn't want me to go on the tour at all. She said, just stay home. We got to take care of this. This is the situation now. You have cancer. Nothing else matters. And in my mind, I was thinking, I could already tell from my readings that there were several possibilities of treatment. There was chemotherapy. There was radiation. There was surgery. People have been talking about possibly eating macrobiotic food, eating certain diets that can help you to eliminate cancers. Some people mentioned acupuncture to me. There are some people that felt that an option is to not do anything at all. So I had to make this choice. And there was no way I could make this choice in the next day or two. So I asked the doctor, I said, I have a tour that's scheduled for 18 days. I said, this actually turned out to be my first big decision. I said, gee, doc, I never had major surgery before. What's this going to be like for me? Am I going to be restricted afterwards? Are there any things I can't do? And he said, well, Dave, he said, I want you to know that you're going to have an incision from your belly button going down about 8 inches. And they looked at me very gravely at this point. And he said, you will probably never, ever do sit-ups again. So, of course, I'm thinking, how am I going to fill that void? And you find out that once you have cancer, it becomes a series of decisions. That's what it is. And I asked the doctor, I said, if I'm away for 18 days, is that really going to make a difference in the overall scope of things? I said, I've probably been getting this, having this situation developing over the course of months, if not years. Does 18 days really make a difference? And I had to weigh that. And he said, well, I don't think the 18 days really makes a big difference. He said, naturally, as your doctor, I'm going to tell you, I think you should not go on the tour. I think you should just stay home and take care of this. He said, but to be honest, I can't tell you that 18 days makes a big difference. I weighed everything, and I decided I was going to go on the tour.
Now, let's go back to the family meeting for a second. Did the doctor say anything there that surprised you?
It was interesting. I had mentioned several things to the doctor about different possibilities of treatment. I talked to him about holistic medicines. I talked to him about foods and diets and even chemo and radiation. And he's a surgeon, and he felt in my case there was no doubt in his mind that what I needed was surgery. The bladder thing made me a little bit nervous, but then the doctor said, Dave, we're going to have to take out your prostate. I was like, why are you doing that? Take out all my prostate. Typical doctor's answer, he says, well, while we're in there. While we're in there. Like he was going into the closet to get a jacket, Yeah, while we're there, we're going to grab a sweater. You don't mind, do you? That's what I needed with surgery. And I had talked to him about visualization and spiritual healing and things of that nature. And he said to me, Dave, please do not go that route. He said, please don't go that route. He said, you need surgery. But it was interesting. At the end of the meeting, when we were done, he said to my family, he said, if you'd all please excuse us, I'd like you all to leave the office now. And he said, I'd like Dave to stay behind. I'd like Dave to stay behind just for a minute. So my family all filed out of the office, and he closed the door, and he said to me, he said, well, Dave, since you're going to go on this tour, you're going to be doing some traveling, and you're going to be on some plane rides for a while. He said, I just wanted to say to you that visualization couldn't hurt you. It wouldn't hurt you to, while you're on the plane, do a little visualizing, do a little affirmations, and maybe think that every cell in your body is healthy. And maybe it wouldn't hurt you to think that.
Well, did you?
Yes, I did, though. At that time, I was willing to do just about everything.
Now, during your education process, Dave, you had to ask a lot of questions. Did you ever feel like you asked too many questions?
Mm-hmm. Well, we all like people to like us. No one likes to be a pain in the neck. And sometimes when you ask questions, you can feel like you're being an annoyance or a pain in the neck to someone. Well, what I would say to anyone now is, it's annoyance time. We all may have an annoyance allowance that we save up over the course of a lifetime. It's time to spend it. It's time to ask the questions. There's actually been studies have been done, and they've found that the people that usually have the best chance of recovery are people that were kind of the most pain in the neck. Doctors have even said, there's been doctors that have been surveyed that have said the people that were the most pain in the neck, that ask the most questions, really do have the best chance of recovery. And I believe it's because they're taking the most active part in their own recovery. Get involved. Instead of just saying, oh, well, whatever the doctor says, I guess I'll do that. Get involved. The doctor might be right, but get involved. Find out the answers to the questions. Ask the questions, the things that matter to you. No one else knows what matters to you. And it's what matters to you that matters.
Dave, you have such a unique perspective on everything. Now, while you were learning about cancer, what were some of the key ideas that really helped you out?
One of the things I did, I went on this tour to Japan and Okinawa and Guam, and I was there for 18 days. And what I did to educate myself, I think I brought 3, maybe 4 books. I brought probably 10 or 12 tapes. I had musical tapes that people had made me. Friends of mine had made me some really nice tapes. My sister made me tapes having to do with spirituality and having to do with adversity. And I got this one set of tapes and books from this guy named Bernie Siegel, who's well known in the world of cancer. I come to find that out now, but he was totally new to me. And I listened to his tapes, and I read his book, and he said a couple of great things. The key thing that I got from him, though, was, because he was a surgeon, and he now deals with spiritual type things, and he's still a surgeon. The key thing I got from him, though, was, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said something to the effect of, I do not recommend types of treatment for people. What I suggest to people is that they educate themselves and then pick the treatment that they feel best suits them, and then go with that treatment 100%. It is just as important to believe in the treatment as it is to pick a treatment that could be right. There is no such thing as the right treatment. In cancer, there are so many different kinds of treatment, and none of them are guaranteed. And that's the thing that set me free. I had been trying to say, I've got to pick the right treatment. I got to get the right one. What's the right one for me? And the truth is, find the one that you believe is the best for you, choose that one, get behind it 100%, and that, I believe, will afford you the best chance for recovery. So in doing my research, it became apparent that there's some sort of a relationship between cancer and stress. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there seems to be evidence of that. So I decided that I needed to be in the least stressful situation I could be in. And that, for me, is here. I love this beach. This is where I grew up. This, to me, brings back nothing but carefree memories. I love walking along the edge of the water in the mud, feeling that mud oozing between my toes. There's something about that. I don't know if it's like a little connection with nature or what, but we used to just spend hours down here, rolling around, playing in the mud. All day. You spend all day in the mud. It was great. I love this place.
Dave, did you get a second opinion?
Oh, yeah. I got a second and a third. For 2 reasons. I wanted to first confirm that I even had the cancer. And second, I wanted to see if there was other alternatives to just getting surgery, what else I could possibly do.
Dave, how'd you go about deciding which treatment was best for you?
You know, that was harder than I thought it would be. Because in the beginning, when I started to do some research, I got to see that it's hard to get an unbiased opinion. If you read a book on microbiotic food, it's by people who believe in microbiotic food. If you read something on shark cartilage, it's written by a guy who believes in shark cartilage. You read something about surgery, it's written by people who believe in surgery. And all with good intentions. They all believe their way is the way to go. So you kind of wish you could just take all these statistics and, you know, put them into a little coffee grinder and come out with the right answer for yourself. But it's just not that easy. You just can't do that. I discovered that a good thing for me to do was to talk to other people who had had the same types of surgery that was being recommended for me. I ended up speaking with a guy who was a carpenter, and he was telling me that he was rehabbing buildings and he's climbing in and out of windows, and it wasn't even a problem. That hasn't even slowed him down. That's the kind of stuff that I needed to hear. That someone had the same type of surgery I had, and it hadn't really slowed them down that much. They had adjusted. They had adapted to it.
Okay, you've decided on the treatment. What was the next battle?
The next battle is to not become the disease. No matter what treatment you pick, you're going to spend a lot of time talking and thinking about cancer. You've got to force yourself to get involved in other aspects of life. I think this is particularly hard for people that have chemotherapy or radiation, because they may go for 2 or 3 weeks at a time where they're making daily trips to the hospital. But I think it's important to spend at least an hour or 2 every day doing something else, focusing on some other aspect of life.
Now you seem to joke around and take this all pretty lightly, but tell us about the day they wheeled you into the surgery room. Were you nervous?
No, and you know, the surgeon asked me the same thing. He said, you seem to be taking this lightly. Aren't you nervous at all? And I said, well, you know, I've already done my part. I've educated myself. I've made my decision. I have a set of spiritual beliefs that I go by. And I'm really not nervous. I said to the surgeon, though, I said, now, if I was you, I'd be nervous. My part's done.
Your surgery's over now. Tell us about your recovery.
Well, it was slow going first couple of weeks. I couldn't eat. I was very weak. And at this point, I still had a catheter in, which, you know, really uncomfortable. And I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And then the big day came. It was July 16th. And I'll never forget that. And they were going to take the catheter out. I was so looking forward to that. I wanted to have a celebration. But interesting thing happened. When the catheter came out, my new bladder had to go to work for the first time. And I think my body kind of was rejecting it, like it was a new organ. And I developed this incredible fever. It was like 104-degree temperature. I was sweating to death, yet I was freezing. I can remember I was like, open the windows, shut the doors, put on the air conditioner, turn on the fan. I was crazy. I was so sick. I hadn't eaten in like a week. And I'll never forget this. It was 11:28 p.m. I looked at the clock. And I remember begging God for help. I just said, you know, God, I don't even want to get all better. I just want to get this much better. I said, if I just want to be able to wash myself, maybe have something to eat, I know I could be all right if I could just do those things. And you know, I mean, I never would have believed a story like this, believe me. Next thing I know, it was 2:28 a.m., and the fever seemed to have gone down a little bit. I was able to get up. I got up in the middle of the night, took myself a shower, had a cup of tea. I was able to feed myself a little bit. And I just started to feel better at that point. And you know, all my life I would have explained that away with some sort of a logic, and I would have said, well, you know, the fever was breaking anyway, and of course that's the way that would happen. And I don't know. I just feel like I desperately needed help. I begged for help, and I believe I got it. And it's changed the way I think about things, really. And that was really the turning point for me, was when that happened. I was able to have that little piece of toast and a cup of tea and wash myself. And I will never forget that. All I wanted was that much better.
Now, Dave, most people don't think of the hospital as a humorous place, but knowing you and how you look at things a little bit differently, what did you find humorous in the hospital?
Well, there was a couple of things. Right away, I was kind of making fun of the place. Everyone knows when you're in the hospital, first of all, you have to wear that Johnny, right? So your rear end is out there flapping in the wind. And I was walking around the hospital. I had to pull my little cart, which of course has all these things. Hanging on top is the stuff that's going into you, and hanging on the bottom is the stuff that's coming out. And you're walking down there, and your entire being is exposed to everyone. And you're walking through the cart, and then you get all these tubes. And I couldn't figure out with the Johnny, where do you wear the tubes? Do you wear them on the outside of the gown, or do you wear them on the inside? It's kind of a fashion statement. I didn't want to do anything incorrect, even though, at the same time, my rear end is flapping in the breeze. What is fashion etiquette during the intravenous process?
How about the pain? Where'd you find humor there?
Well, I must say that when you first come out of surgery, the pain, you're really very groggy. And they had me on this little thing called a PSA, which is a patient-supplied analgesic, which means you're in charge of your own dope, is what that means. And I had this little thing next to me. It looked like a little tiny water cooler. And there was a little button attached to that was around my neck. And this was morphine, which is a pretty happy little substance, I must say. And they said to me, no, Dave, Dave, we don't want you to worry about that. If you're going to do anything at all, you press that button. They said, if you're even going to go to the bathroom, press the button. If you're going to even roll over, press the button. And I'm thinking, like, they have no idea who they're talking to. They say, feel free to press the button. I'm looking for duct tape. And they said, don't be afraid to press the button. I'm like, yeah, I used the button. I wasn't afraid. I used it. Stuff works, too. I had no pain whatsoever. Huge blister on my thumb, you know, but... There was one time, you know, when you're alone in the hospital, you do a lot of thinking, and there was a couple of times I could have sworn that I had a couple of spiritual experiences in there, and I probably did. There was one time I could have sworn that God was right in the room with me. Turns out I had fallen asleep on the button is what it was.
Dave, you mentioned to me several times about your magic mud. Explain what you mean by your magic mud.
Well, I think to think that recovery from any kind of major disease is just a physical thing would be a mistake. I think what I've learned really is that there's a lot of spirituality involved in it. And my magic mud was to come down to this beach where I grew up, where there's so much feeling here for me. And that was the beginning of my recovery process. I think you need to be with your people, to be in your kind of place, and to come down here on this beach with this mud and the water that I love so much, to be down at my mother's house, to be in a very nurturing environment was important for my spirit to get here. And that's what I mean by the magic mud. I think everybody has a place where they have some sort of magic mud. I was in the hospital, like I said, for 10 or 11 days. And, weird things happened in the hospital. I'd never been in the hospital that long and for anything as serious. And I was walking around the hospital, and you, as positive as I was, you cannot help but get a little bit nervous, Boy, there's a possibility that you end up, not getting out of here. So it was a little bit scary. And I remember on the last day, I'll never forget this, it was July 5th. They brought me downstairs in a wheelchair, and they were letting me out. And I was at the Deaconess Hospital, and my wife was with me. And right outside the Deaconess Hospital, there's a nice little park across the street. It's not a big deal, but there's about maybe 10 trees, a few benches. And it was grassy and greeny, and it was just one of those kind of scenes, And it was a beautiful, hot day, and they brought me down in the wheelchair. And as soon as I came out the door, it dawned on me that I had not been outside even for 10 or 11 days. And I was so happy to be out of the hospital. And I'll never forget this. I come out of the hospital and I hit the sidewalk, and this unbelievably fabulous breeze hit me across the face. And I can remember just feeling that and feeling so happy and full of life. And I can remember I started whimpering a little bit at first, and then I started blubbering. I was crying, just completely bawling my eyes out. And I'll never forget this because my wife, who had been the rock the entire time, had never been able to cry, that I saw anyway, not in front of me. And when she heard me, she turned around, and we were waiting for the valet to get her car. And when she heard me whimpering, she turned around, she saw me crying, she just let go and started bawling her eyes out. And now here we are on the sidewalk, I'm in the wheelchair, hugging each other, just crying our eyes out. It was wonderful. And then the poor valet pulls up, and he looks at us, and he thought he smacked up the front of the car. I will never forget what happened, though. I got in my wife's truck, and we started driving home. And we're going along Stour Drive, or it could be any highway, doesn't matter. And I was like a new little puppy, honestly. I'd never been outside. I was just looking around. I was so thrilled to be out. We're driving along Stour Drive, and I remember thinking, oh, I love Stour Drive. And we got into some traffic right away, of course, and I remember thinking, I love traffic. It's wonderful. And I love to tell that story because I like to remind myself how I was that day. I did love Stour Drive. I did love traffic. And that's a feeling that I like to keep that attitude because I'm already caught up in business and work and money and all those things again. And I have to remind myself all the time, and I would like to remind you and ask you to try to remember to feel the breeze. It's so great to be alive. Thanks a lot, guys. You've been a great audience.
Dave, if you had just 3 ideas to give to cancer patients and their families, what would they be?
Well, number one, and most important, is to get involved in your own recovery. Number 2, I'd say find your own magic mud. Everybody has a place like this in their life. If they had a choice to go to, they could. And 3rd, I would say to remember to please feel the breeze. Enjoy life while you can.
So you're finding your way you know in your mind that life's here, it never fades away. But now it's different, 'cause I know, and I treasure everything I lay my eyes upon. Some advice from one who's been on his knees. Just feel the breeze. So you find a way to make things work out. And you got your magic mud. It's right here, how precious the simple thing. I see it, and I know, and I treasure everything I lay my eyes upon.